All right, let's dive into one of the greatest characters in TV history, Tyrion Lannister. For so many of us, he was the witty, wine-loving heart of Game of Thrones. But you know what? The story behind the character is every bit as compelling as the one we watched on screen.
I mean, you really gotta ask yourself that. In a show filled with dragons, ice zombies, and a cast of what feels like a million people, how did this one guy, the imp, as they called him, end up capturing everyone's imagination and becoming the absolute soul of the series? The answer is, well, it's a little complicated.
To really get to the bottom of it, we need to look at three things. First up, the character that George R.R. Martin created in the books. Then, we have to talk about the powerhouse actor who brought him to life. And finally, we're going to explore that amazing gray area where the on-screen legend and the real-world impact of Peter Dinklage kind of blend together.
So let's start right at the very beginning, with the casting. Because as it turns out, finding Tyrion wasn't really a search at all. It was more like destiny. For the guys making the show, there was only ever one person for the job. And what's just wild is how everybody was on the same page. The showrunners, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, they wanted Peter Dinklage. George R.R. Martin, the author himself, he also said Dinklage was his #1 pick. It was a perfect storm, which made him, officially, the very first actor cast in the entire show. But here's the kicker. He almost said no. Can you believe that? Dinklage was really skeptical of the whole fantasy genre. He was afraid it was going to be another one of those roles. You know, the long beards, the pointy shoes, exactly the kind of stereotype he'd spent his whole career fighting against. So, what changed his mind? Simple, the writing. Once he read the scripts, he saw that Tyrion wasn't a joke. He was this incredibly complex, sharp, and deeply human character. And that's all it took. That one decision to demand depth would end up defining everything that came next. Okay, so Dinklage is on board. Now let's get into how the character himself started to change. Because the Tyrion we all know and love from TV, he's a brilliant adaptation for sure, but he's not an exact copy of the guy from the books.
Ah, this line. It's just so Tyrion, isn't it? It's cocky, it's clever, and it pretty much became his calling card. You saw it on t-shirts, mugs, everywhere. It's one of the most famous lines in modern television.
And here's the thing. It was written completely for the show. Never appears in the books once. This is a perfect example of how the showrunners decided to really lean into Tyrion's wit, making it his signature trait. But in the books, his drinking comes from a much darker place. See, in the novels, his drinking isn't just some charming habit. It is a direct result of a lifetime of just awful abuse from his own family. It's how he numbs the pain. It's self-medication, which is a much heavier idea than the show sometimes lets on. And speaking of changes, let's talk about his battle scar. On the right, you see the show's version, that cool, rugged scar across his face. But on the left, whoa, the book version is way more brutal. He gets a chunk of his nose hacked off, leaving him seriously disfigured. So why the switch? Well, honestly, it was just practical. I mean, think about it. To create that missing nose effect would have meant hours and hours of complex makeup work for Peter Dinklage every single day for years. It just wasn't going to work for a show this massive. And this all brings us to the man himself, because Peter Dinklage's influence didn't stop at the borders of Westeros. Oh no, the way he played Tyrion created actual shockwaves in the real-world entertainment industry. You can really see his impact in 3 stages. First, he just flat-out refused roles that were built on cheap jokes about his height. Second, by taking on Tyrion, he proved a character like this deserved to be treated with intelligence, not just as a punchline. And finally, his massive success was a wake-up call for Hollywood, proving audiences were hungry for complex characters and forcing a lot of people to rethink how they cast their roles. And look, this isn't just a feeling or an opinion. You can actually see his importance in the hard data. The numbers don't lie. Let's start with this number, 4. Peter Dinklage won 4 Primetime Emmy Awards for playing Tyrion. 4. That is just an incredible achievement and a record for any actor on the show. Okay, now for the next number, 67. Out of 73 total episodes, Tyrion Lannister appeared in 67 of them. Now let's put those 2 facts together and see the whole picture. When you lay it all out, it's It's undeniable. He won more Emmys than anyone else in the cast. He was in more episodes than any other character. And he's the only character who was there from the pilot right through to the grand finale. Statistically speaking, he is the main character of Game of Thrones. So after all that, the awards, the screen time, the cultural impact, there's really only one opinion left that carries the most weight. The man who dreamed all of this up in the first place. So, what about George R.R. Martin? In this massive universe he built from scratch with all these incredible characters, where does Tyrion land for him? Well, it turns out Martin has said it himself, Tyrion is his favorite character to write. And his reason why is just perfect. Because Tyrion's an outcast. He's not tied down by all the rules of honor and duty like everyone else. He has a unique freedom to be cynical, to be smart, and to say the things that nobody else has the guts to say. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. We praise Tyrion, the character, for speaking truth to power inside this fantasy world. But Peter Dinklage, the actor, did the exact same thing in our world by demanding a role with dignity and changing an industry. It really makes you wonder, who's the real truth teller here? The character or the incredible actor who gave him a voice?